can't even imagine. You compare a Raven to what you're doing now. What goes on in your head? Like, when you're out there and there's this immense stage and this immense production, what do you ever go, wow, this is a lot going on? Or is that just that happened before?
Well, two things. One, I constantly have to remind myself that I am like the luckiest son of a bitch on the planet, that I still have a job. Two, I think as you progress and you grow, right, kind of like in life, right? Like we go from like having like no responsibilities to a little to a few to like, you know, all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, what happened? Now I'm like 59 years old and I still have this, like, I think you just like, it just happens, right? Like if you're successful, you're gonna go to a bigger tour, to a bigger tour, to a bigger tour, where it's kind of like when you get to, I guess as far as you can go, you're touring the world playing baseball stadiums and soccer stadiums and football stadiums, right? Because those are kind of like the, and unless you like go outside to like play a park where you can put more people in, or, you know, those big festivals, you know, like a Coachella, or like in Europe, you know, like a Rock Werchter or whatever. I mean, it goes on and on. Glastonbury in the UK. I mean, there's just, there's some iconic things that you know, it's like, okay, I played that or whatever, but yeah, I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I don't look at it that way. Like, again, it's the old adage. Somebody said, it's like, to the best of my knowledge, that guy still puts his pants on one leg at a time. I don't think there's somebody that holds him up and then drops him into his pants so he can put him on two legs at a time. Now, maybe he does, and maybe people do, but it's, you know, it's where you're at.
Well, another question I've got, you know, we watched that documentary on roadies, and it was pretty predictable.
Oh, very much so.
So what would you say some of the biggest misconceptions are about when people say roadie? Everybody builds a picture in their mind immediately of, you know, and to some extent you talked about that, you know, puking and getting drunk and all that stuff, but that's such a minute part of the whole job. What's the biggest misconception that people would have no idea?
Well, I mean, like that, they're people. They're not like, you know, horrible hooligans that just want to, you know, like fuck and suck and snort and drink their way across the planet. Now, like, you know, the old 1% adage, those people are there. They exist, but for the most part, I mean, you know, I guess when I was a young man, I acted like a young man. But I mean, I have been so happily married and with the same person now for, it'll be, you know, 31 years of marriage this year, right? And I never fucked around on my wife because, like, I took those vows seriously. And you know what? She did as well. And the one thing that you have to have, if you're going to have a relationship on tour, is trust. And I've fucked up a lot of things in my life, but I never fucked that up, and I wouldn't, because I don't want to ever lose that trust or the trust I have in her, right? Because I don't care what people say. When you're in a relationship and you lose the trust, in my humble opinion, just pack it in. Start again. I don't know. I've never seen it work out. And as we've talked about this last night, and as you said, it's like, well, there's not a lot of people that have successful relationships on the road. And I know I'm getting a little bit off topic, but it's like,
but you're not.
But it's like, it's hard enough, and you know this because you were in a long-term relationship with a person as well. It's hard enough to be in a relationship with somebody under ideal conditions. You still have to work your ass off for it. And then you put in not ideal conditions, like being away 9 months a year and trying to raise a child. And yeah, I don't know, it's definitely not for everybody, you know?
Do you feel like your success is due to your wife? Do you feel any?
Oh, completely. Because without her to not only raise our son while I was gone, right, but to run the household, to take care of making sure that everything's getting paid and all the finances. And don't get me wrong, there's people out there on tour that have families that do that as well, right? But with us, and when we started and we made the conscious decision of like, okay, I can work and make enough money to pay the bills, and you can stay home and run the household and take care of our son, and we don't have to put him in daycare. And like, if I didn't tour and I stayed home, well, if we're both working to pay the bills. We're not seeing our kid, so the kid's going to be in daycare, and then the kid gets home, and we're both tired, and we're both cranky, and then there's probably going to be problems with money, like with everything. It's like, would we stay together? I don't know, right? But for us, this is what worked out. But I mean, there's just a lot of, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of dumbass people who fuck it up by fucking around on tour, or like just getting, it's so easy. That's one thing, it's so easy to get sucked into that lifestyle. And I would be lying if I said when I was a kid, like in my late teens and 20s, that was part of it for me. Yeah, I loved music, but everything that came with, like working for bands and going to shows, I loved all that too, you know? I mean, I'm a heterosexual male. I like girls. And, you know, it's like, that was part of it, right? Good, right, wrong, or whatever. But I mean, I already did drugs before I started working for bands. Right? I like to get high. I like to drink. It was just part of whatever I am. So, I mean, I can't put that on them. And I mean, I went out on dates and had girlfriends and all that. But, you know, there was definitely a lot more of that on tour, at least in like the 80s and 90s. I mean, you know, I got married in July 11th of 92. So anything after that, or even before that, because we started to not really date, but we connected at the beginning of the summer of that year or whatever. So really, yeah, I mean, you know, beginning of 92, that's it. I'm done, you know, happily. I got no regrets. You know, good Lord willing, it'll continue on. If it ends now, what a run. You know, but it definitely not for everybody. And it's... But again, and I sound like the old man that I am, but it's different now. You know, you can't go out and learn your craft with a club act, playing 3-4 nights a week, either in the state you're in, or, you know, in my case, being in upstate New York, like we played PA, we drifted a little bit into New England and whatnot. But I mean, between playing New York and PA, we'd play at least 3 nights a week, every weekend, you know? So what's that, 12 gigs? We probably played at least 15, 16 gigs a month. So that's quite a lot to, like, you know, like I said, make your mistakes there, not on like the mega stage, right? And I've made mistakes on the mega stage. I don't know anyone who hasn't, right? But the thing is to learn from them, not make them again, you know? And some people can and some people can't, you know? And then some people come out and they just get eaten alive by this business. I've seen that as well, you know? I mean, I guess, you know, again, more luck than judgment that I'm here talking to you. You know, because it wasn't anything that was like their big plan or nothing. No. You know.
So what would you say? The best qualities, if you were giving somebody advice, or you were scouting, like talent, meaning talent to do what you do? What would you say? What are the qualities that you kind of have to have?
Work ethic, sense of urgency, and you gotta be like willing to, at least in my case, like, you know, watch other people and learn, right? Like, you can't come in going, well, I know what I'm doing and I know how to do, you know what I mean? I mean, I guess you need a little bit of an attitude, but like, you have to realize, like, look, what I used to do is I'd watch somebody, right? Like, for instance, I alluded to Gumby, John Goodwin, earlier. I watched that guy and I'm like, he is so better at this than I am. So I started watching how he would change strings, watching how he stretched strings, watching how he would, like, you know, get the guitar like kind of worked in before you started tuning it, you know, to simulate like it being played. So it's like tuned properly when the guy gets it. And I just, you know, same thing, like watched drum techs better than me, the way they tune drums. And learned and picked it up and just went like, you know, again, I try to tell people when I try to give them, you know, information, I'm like, man, I was not born knowing this. I had to learn it. Thank God somebody either took the time to teach me or I stole it from them, you know? I mean, it's like, it's out there, right? And especially now with the internet, I mean, you can go out and Google, like, you know, for instance, like, let's say you're working on a Fender Strat, and it's like, well, how do I wire this 5-way switch? Why? It's all there. There's like, okay, well, there you go. Whereas before, you kind of like either had to have someone show you, or, you know, back in the Polaroid days, right? You'd open a guitar up and take a Polaroid picture of what one worked. You know, I used to keep, like, you know, when I was a guitar tech, well, before I got like a schematic book, right? When I was like starting out, I had a Polaroid camera and I like opened up, you know, and went, okay, this is what a 5-way looks like wired, and the configuration of a Strat and one of a Les Paul, and I knew worked. So if I got in a jam, I could be like, well, I can refer to something. But then I got, you know, a wiring diagram. Like there was this company that's still around called Stuart McDonald, StuMac. And now it's all online, but they used to have like catalogs, right? And it was specifically geared towards like luthiers, guitar techs, right? And they would have these books you could buy, like, okay, this is, you know, wiring schematic for dummies for, you know, Marshall amps and Fender amps and whatever, or, you know, Gibson guitars, Fender guitars, whatever. And I bought a couple of those and I'd have them. And I mean, it's no different than like a mechanic referring to like a Chilton's manual or whatever, right? Like, yeah, he's a mechanic. He understands that, you know, it's like, okay, in the old days, it was, you know, air, spark, and gas, right? Now it's computers. But you didn't know every engine and how everybody did it. I mean, my old man was a diesel mechanic most of his life, and he was damn good at it. But you know what? He had a bunch of manuals he'd refer to as well. So it's no different for me. But now you can find that shit everywhere. You know, like my son had I got at this Strat, and I had bought a bunch of them, and I resold them, and he wanted one, right? And he's like, but hey, you know what? I don't really like a 5-way switch. Can you just put a 3-position switch in it, right? Or maybe it was the other way around. But like, I kind of remember, but I ain't freaking opened a guitar up to solder one in probably like 15 years, right? So again, you go online, oh, there it is. Oh yeah, now I remember, there you go. I mean, it's just so simple. You know, if you got internet and a phone or whatever, you're there.
Yeah, YouTube, whatever.
Yeah, it's there.
So talk about major fuck-ups. Talk about like major shit that you're like, oh man, did I screw that up?
Well, there's one that comes to mind with Savoy Brown. So if you go back or if you've listened to what I talked about, that was where I first got like really thrown into the deep end to be a guitar tech. Okay. And we're playing this festival, I want to say somewhere in PA, and Mark Farner from Grand Funk is a headliner, and we're going on before Mark, right? Well, back in those days, like, there was always this battle of like who had the biggest guitar stack or whatever, right? So Kim Simmons, it's his band, right? He's the guy. But the other guitar player at the time had like 2 4x12 cabinets that he'd like put on their sides, and then he had a rack and another head on top, right? But it all like stacked properly. It fit together well, right? Well, it was a little bit taller than Kim's. So Kim's like, well, I cannot have his stack taller than mine. Okay, so what I had to do is Kim had a Marshall 412, and he had what we call a combo. And what a combo is like a 212 speakers with an amp in it, all right? So, and then he had a 100-watt Marshall head that was on top, that would go on top of that. So I took the case from the 100-watt Marshall head, and that's what I started my pyramid with. And then I had the 412, and then I had the combo, and then I had the Marshall head, and then on top of that, I had a 4-space rack that like this old Korg delay was in, right? But I couldn't set it on top of the Marshall because it was all like wonky with a handle. So I found these like 2 square tubing pieces of metal, and I set those there and set the rack on it, right? So this thing is like the freaking, like if there's ever a Leaning Tower of Pisa, this is it, okay? And it's so tall that I need stand in a milk crate to get to the top rack to patch it, okay? So whatever, I'm like, dude, I'll do whatever you want me to do. So we get in there, first song, right? And I have to get up for this. First song, Kim goes, the delay's not working. So I go back behind the stack, and I get up on my milk crate, and I go to touch the cable, and God is my witness, the whole thing does this. Smash on the stage, right? Kim turns around, and here I am standing on a milk crate with a 1/4-inch cable in my hand, and the stack is all over the stage. So of course we stopped playing, and thankfully Mark Farner's guitar tech is this guy Bobby O'D, who went on to guitar tech for so many people, but he was mixed guitar tech with Motley Crue for a really long time, and a great guy. So he comes out, right, helps me put it back together. I can sit down again now if you want me to. Okay, helps me put it back together. And thanks be to, you know, God or Allah or whatever you want to call this supreme being, if there is one, the thing works, right? Of course, minus the delay, because we've just discarded the delay at this point, right? And come back out and we do the show. So as moments go, that was one that I definitely remember. And I mean, there's a bunch of them, man. Like, you know, it's like, God, I try to forget them, Alan. That's the stuff I don't want to say.